that you have made based on what we see around us every day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I don't know how long ago it was when we were together last time looking at this, but we looked at verse 1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. And we talked about the verses 1 through 6 talking about the glory of God. Verse 1 is the magnitude. The heavens declare all of outer space. Isaiah 40:22 talks about the vast distance, the depth, the height, the length, the unfathomableness of it. 1 Corinthians 15:41 talks about the size, the nature, the composition, the galaxies. When you declare something, the word literally means to score with a mark, like a tally or a scribe. And so if you think about it in that regard, when we played games here for our Youth Adult Challenge, somebody'd answer a question, what would Chad do? He would declare it on the board, right? He'd put a mark. Then you'd ask again. If somebody missed, then you come over here and, okay, now this team gets another point. We're going to declare it. We're going to scribe it. And so he starts off this wonderful psalm here by saying every time you look around you, it's not just something to casually be interested in. It's as if God put a tally mark and scribed, hey, this is something about me. This is something about me. This is something about me. And when we are amazed at the whole of creation, it's because we start taking up those individual tally marks like the last 4 or 5 chapters of Job, and you start putting them together and realizing that the sum of it sometimes is pretty overpowering. The firmament showeth his handiwork. The sky, the observable atmosphere, and showeth is to announce, to expose, to expound, to be a messenger. So you have everything that is revealed in the clouds. And then we talked about handiwork as the product or the labor of someone's hand. You can go on Etsy or some of these other places and you can order things that folks made. I know when we were over in Newcastle, there were some folks we knew that had in West Virginia off the big road up there, they had that arts and crafts place, and they used to make stuff and take it up there and sell it. They had their booth there, and they would put their mark on something so that when you went and looked at it, you could say, oh, this is so-and-so. That's kind of what he's talking about here. Every time you look around at something in the heavens, it's as if God stamped it and said, made by Jehovah. And it ought to draw attention to the person that he is. That's the whole purpose of what he's talking about here. And then we get to verse 2 tonight, and we look at the accumulation. This is a pretty interesting phrase when I started studying this. And sometimes you read something and you think you know what it means. And then you start studying it and looking at the way the words are put together, and you come out with nuances that I personally had never thought about before. It says, day unto day, each day teaches another relative the excellency of the manifold works of God. And the first time I read that in a commentary, I thought, oh, wait a minute, I got to ponder this for just a minute. But then I got to thinking about it. We keep track of everything in our lives by days. How old are you? Well, I'm so many years. Well, if you really wanted to be technical about it, you could say I'm so many years, I'm so many months, I'm so many weeks, I'm so many days, I'm so many hours, so many seconds. How detailed you wanted to be, right? And if you think about that statement, each day teaches another relative or another day the excellency of the manifold works of God. As we are rotating around the sun is always shining. And so one of the things that we learn, and we'll talk about some more of that here in a few minutes, is that he's always there. There's always that awareness, because it's not like God stops in the night and he's not available to anybody, or he's not working anywhere, or he's not doing anything. He is as constant as the sun. Now, there are times in the day you might not see him, but day after day after day after day, it's talking about building a continuation here of what is happening. In other words, there's no intermission. There's a continual action of expression. Constant. He doesn't say, on Monday I'm going to reveal myself to people and then I'm going to wait until next Monday. No, because just as the sun is constant and there's always day and then there's always day and there's always day, there's this constant accumulation of God revealing himself to us through what he has created. It says, day unto day uttereth speech. And that is an interesting phrase. You know, when you think about uttering speech, in normal language, I just think talking. But that's not what it means. It means to belch out, to pour out. And every time I read that, I can't help but think about Paul. You know, he gets excited about writing a letter to one of the churches, and he's trying to explain something, and you can hear him get more excited. And next thing you know, instead of having one little phrase, he's got this run-on that might go on for 7 or 8 or 9 verses. Because he's just like, when he talks about the excellency of the knowledge of the grace of God. I mean, he doesn't just put a period there. He's like, or the love of God, the height, the depth, and this, and this, and this. And he gets excited about talking about what we are in Jesus Christ. Oh yeah, I wanted to tell you, in Jesus Christ you're such and such. But you're also, and 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 you're also. And you get to those passages and you think, my goodness, you could sit there and preach 15 messages on one verse. Because he packs, that's exactly what he's talking about right here. It's like belching out, like pouring out volumes and volumes and volumes that we could learn about the Creator day after day after day. In other words, every day is joyously gushing out the glory of God without stop. And then he says, night unto night. It's the same idea as the day, giving information to each other and adding to that is already gained. We were talking when we were going over Genesis. One of the kids asked, getting ready for the Youth Adult Challenge, which almost nobody showed up for, but that's beside the point, I guess. One of the boys said, how old did they live? I said, well, it depends. You know, if you're back at Adam, they tended to live a really long time, and then lifespan started getting a little bit shorter. Methuselah was the longest one. Well, how long did he live? So I gave him a reference and had him look it up. Mind-blowing. I mean, those fellas were just sitting there for a little while going, well, if you were 800 years old, wonder how many kids you could have in 800 years. And they'd slap each other and go, you wouldn't have more than 10 or 12. I mean, you're not going to have children when you're 50 or 60 or 70. They just lived a lot longer after. And I said, no, actually. And we went back to Noah. Noah didn't even start having kids till after he was, what? He lived that long before he had his first child? Yeah. How long did he live? Well, it's laid right out here for you. You mean they were having kids for 300 and 400 years? Yeah, they were. How in the world would you keep track of the birthdays? One of them just outs with it. And I'm like, yeah. And then the one boy who didn't show up a whole lot and was kind of trying to catch up to what we were talking about, he looks at me and he said, how much could you learn in 500 or 600 or 700 years? Did they have to go to school for like 300 years? I was like, well, no, they didn't go to school, but think about how much you could experience and pass on to your grandkids or your great-grandkids. Well, then that got them started thinking about how many generations you would. Okay, that's the same concept here. If you think about somebody living for 500 years and the accumulation of knowledge that you would have, How many folks, when they get to be 30 or 40 years old, wish they had spent a lot more time talking to grandma and grandpa and learning things that they already experienced instead of having to relearn everything? And you know folks that had to relearn everything, and so it's not like we have an accumulation of knowledge, even though we are getting smarter and we're developing a lot of technologies. But think in their day. I mean, if you wanted to know something that happened 400 years ago, go ask great-grandpappy Adam, who's middle-aged, by the way, right? I mean, it's not like he was losing his faculties. He's middle-aged, and he's got how many generations of kids running around? That's this concept. And so the day and the night are belching forth, they are showing forth, they are tallying the handiwork of God, and they keep on doing it, and they keep on doing it, and they keep on doing it. And if you're paying attention to it, you learn, and then you learn, and then you learn, and then you learn, and the more you pay attention to it, the more you learn about Him, and there's this huge wealth of knowledge and understanding that can be gained from creation itself, because it's constantly belching out His glory. Glory of the sun by day and glory of the moon and stars by night. And if you think about it, it is always day or night somewhere. So it's constantly happening. Brings us to the phrase, day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. Now this is interesting because it says it shows it. It doesn't say it knows it or it does it. It doesn't have its own knowledge. I was thinking about this and I thought, well, if it doesn't produce knowledge, then what's the big deal? And then it dawned on me, well, the moon reflects the light of the sun. It does not produce its own light. So we look at it and we say, wow, the moonlight is really bright tonight. But actually that's kind of false, because truly, the sunlight is just being really reflected off of the moon tonight. And that's what creation does. You look at creation and you don't worship creation because in and of itself, it is not producing the knowledge. It is not developing itself. It's not running itself. It is reflecting the glory of God. And that's why you have the passage, we don't have time to turn to them tonight, that says we need to be very careful that we don't worship the creation, that we worship the Creator, because that's where the glory comes from, not from the creation itself. Creation reflects the knowledge, the power, and the glory of its Creator. Well, then that tells us we ought to start asking ourselves, well, what knowledge then, right? I mean, if it's reflecting the knowledge of the Creator, what is it reflecting? Because we ought to be seeing something, and we ought to be understanding something and applying something. If you think about all of creation designed by the Creator, a couple of things. Number one, detailed in the individual concepts. I think I really started paying attention to this. I had to substitute one time in a science class at Wayside, and they were watching this series. The guy was as dry as watching paint dry. I mean, he really was. He was a smart guy, and he would get excited about this stuff. But I'm telling you, if you could stay awake and if you could listen to him, it was incredible. And the section that we were watching that day was on how we hear. And I have heard before, about how we hear, but this guy, like, whole new level. Always before, you got your big ears here, and some people don't like how big their ears are, but that's what catches the sound, and then it goes in and hits your eardrum, creates the vibrations, and goes through the little three bones in there, and, does all that. I've heard all that before. This guy takes it down to the thousands of millions of tiny little intricate machines that make that happen. How your balance gets affected when you have a cold because of how these tiny little machines are vibrating and hammering and doing all these things, and how loud noises cause you to go deaf. And unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. There is so much more information there that we teach elementary kids about. Sound goes in here, hits your little eardrum, it waves back and forth, these little things, the brain transforms it and you hear sound. There is so much more to that. Why? Because the individual concept of just the hearing in your ear is mind-boggling. And then a couple of days later, we were doing how you see, and the rods and the cones, and why some people are, and what's different in you than in certain animals, and it's mind-boggling, okay? And so those individual little concepts tell us that our Creator is incredibly detailed. So much more than we could even imagine. You say, Pastor, what's the big idea? Listen, when is the last time when you were in the middle of an awful trial or a tribulation, you found comfort in the fact that He knows so much about that trial, or He knows as much about that trial or tribulation as you don't know about all them little machines running in your ear so you can hear my voice right now? If you could fully understand all the rods and the cones and how light reacts and all the things that your eyes do, it would blow your mind about how concerned God is about the little details. And that means every trial we go through, every difficulty that we face, all of the ups and downs in life. God, I don't understand. Listen, you might not understand why you're going through it, but He knows to the amazing detail exactly what you are dealing with and exactly how He's going to deal with it. That should bring a great deal of comfort. Number 2, complex in the organization of each unit. Touch your finger to the stove. Now you know the pain that produces, but study all of the things that happen together and so fast that causes you to immediately jerk your finger away from the stove. It's unbelievable the thousands of little pulses that race to your brain processes it, fires things off to your muscles, and you jerk your hand back and say, ow! And then run for an ice cube or cold water or whatever. And the complexity of all of those things that just happens tells me how much He has everything under control. Let's go a little bigger. Comprehensiveness in putting it all together. You look at stars and you study individual stars. Well, that thing's about this big and it's so far away from our Earth and it's made of such and such and it twitters or twinkles or reflects from somewhere else, and this one does this and this one and this one and this one. That each individual one is incredible. The complexity of the organization is something else, but it's absolutely mind-boggling, the comprehensiveness when you start putting the whole thing together. If you think that a problem is too overwhelming, go outside and look up at the stars and think, I know who's got this, because I know who has all that. And certainly He knows about my problems and He knows about my troubles, because those stars aren't falling out and those planets aren't going wonky, and magnetism and gravity and all the other scientific things aren't just flying off into space and going crazy. The comprehensiveness of putting it all together is mind-boggling. And yet He doesn't give it a second thought. All of these things create in us the ability to learn a great deal about Him. The heavens, the firmament. Have you thought about the expanse? If you have a big expanse, and somebody creates it and controls it, they have to be bigger. And it talks about the supremacy of our God. In Psalm 68:8, it said, He rideth on the heaven of heavens. Okay, have you ever rode a really big horse? I mean, I've sat on one so fat I thought my legs were going to bust like a wishbone. You ride one of those great big massive Percherons or Clydesdales or something like that, those suckers are so big and so fat, your legs are like, ugh! And yet, you just turn them with a bridle in their mouth. We're going to talk about that in James, right? And they go wherever you want to. This massive, powerful animal, and I'm riding on it. It shows control. It shows that I'm bigger than it. Now, horses can get out of control, but the world is never going to get out of his control. Go to Job chapter 37, if you have your swords. Job chapter 37, starting in verse 14. Here's a thought. Hearken unto this, O Job. Stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. Now remember, he's in the middle of awful tribulation. And every time I feel like I'm getting overwhelmed, I try to think about Job. Midst of awful tribulation, and one of God's answers to him is, Job, stand still and just consider the works of God for a minute. Because day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth his handiwork. The heavens declare the glory of God. Just stand still a minute and look at it. Dost thou know when God disposed them and caused the light of his cloud to shine? Dost thou know the balancing of the clouds, the wondrous works of him which is perfect in knowledge? How do we measure knowledge today? Now you take tests, you got midterms and finals that'll be coming up for kids that are getting out of college here in a couple of weeks, and high school in a month or a month and a half or something. Are they perfect in knowledge? Can you discern this problem and figure it out? Can you discern this problem and figure it out? How do you conjugate this sentence? What verb tense agreement is supposed to work here? This math problem or whatever it is. Can you perfectly divine? Listen, Job, go outside, look up there, and you tell me, how do you solve the problem of keeping the clouds balanced in the sky? Because what are they balanced on, Job? That tells me, whoa, baby, intricate knowledge, far beyond I can compute. How thy garments are warm when he quieteth the earth by the south wind. Hast thou with him spread out the sky which is strong, and as a molten looking glass? Teach us what we shall say unto him, for we cannot order our speech by reason of darkness. Shall it be told him that I speak? If a man speak, surely he shall be swallowed up. Swallowed up in what? Well, you're dealing with knowledge you can't even begin to describe. Tell me how scientists can look at it and show you those pictures in the textbook about this layer of the atmosphere, and then this layer of the atmosphere, and then this layer of the atmosphere. And this one's made of this percentage of this, and this percentage of this, and this one's made of different percentages, and then this one's made of different, and gravity affects people down here in this one, but it's far different here. And if we get through this one, man, we can go all the way to the moon because it doesn't act much out here. But yet then the moon starts pulling you in when you get to... Why isn't it all just the same? Because he striates it and balances it. It has form. It has nature to it. It has measurable characteristic and qualities. But he says it's like molten glass. You can look right through it. Job, explain to me how you can look through substance. Yeah, I would pull a Job too and shut my mouth. Right? But we learned something incredible about God. I think we'll quit there for tonight before we get into transcendence, or I'm going to pull a Paul myself. Praises or prayer requests tonight?